Kevin Pelton, Bobby Marks, Chris Herring over at ESPN.com. They have the list of the top 25 players under the age of 25. And Pete Thompson, there were 3 Sixers who appeared on that list. We'll get into that. We'll get into the NBA. The Sixers take on the Heat tonight with our buddy Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com NBA insider. He joins us now on the Sports Bash live on 97.3 ESPN. Welcome back, Kevin. Been a while.
Yeah, I guess there hasn't been as much to explain with the Sixers now that they're just winning games.
Well, you would think, but there are still people here who question the coach. They turn the ball over too much. They blow too many big leads. So they still have some bugaboos that need to be fixed.
Yeah, not a finished product yet, but nice to see some returns on the last few years.
No question. And when you look at this team right now, are they ahead of where you thought they would be? Are they kind of right about where you thought, or have they exceeded your expectations, not met your expectations?
I think they've exceeded my expectations for this year. I mean, it's hard to say going back all the way to the beginning of the Sam Hinkie era where one would have thought they would be at this point. But, based on last year, I thought they would be more competitive in the mix for a playoff spot, but didn't think that they'd be, a team that has a chance to get home court advantage if things break right over the next month here. And, that's testament to the fact that Joel Embiid has been able to stay healthy and play extended minutes, many more than last season, and that I think Ben Simmons has been a better player as a rookie than I expected, right off the bat.
Yeah, he seems to be a guy that a lot of people either thought was going to take this league by storm or they weren't really so sure what to think. But even with the inability to shoot the ball from, really further than the elbows at this stage of his career, or he's choosing not to do that, a lot of people seen him in practice and said, look, he shoots the ball all the time. He just doesn't pull the trigger. For him to be at this level so one-dimensionally offensively, where do you think he could be in a couple of years from now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much better, I don't know that he ever needs to be a great shooter to be a very good player in this league. I think, Giannis Antetokounmpo, what he's done in Milwaukee, it kind of sets the template for, as long as you've got the ability to get to the basket and you're playing primarily with the ball in your hands, as Simmons is going to, that, even not having a consistent three-point shot or even, that strong a mid-range shot, you can still be a very valuable player. And, I think the place he's been ahead of my expectations, even though I thought he was, easily the best prospect in the 2016 draft, is that he's done a much better job of finishing right away after having some issues, finishing with his left hand in summer league before, what was going to be his rookie season. And then also defensively, he's been a very consistent presence there after being, inconsistent in terms of his effort in college.
Now, you guys ranked the top 25 under 25. Ben Simmons is tied for 6th on that list, and you wrote about him. And the one thing you said is he made just 15 shots all season from beyond 15 feet, not one three-pointer. Do you think, though, that is a part of his game that will – maybe he doesn't have to, but do you think it is something that he can do? Can he develop more than a 15-footer?
Sure. I mean, that's probably the easiest portion of the game for players to improve. Now, that shouldn't be construed it's automatically going to improve because, if that were the case, there's a bunch of guys who are in the G League right now who would be NBA players. But it's certainly something he can improve, and I think one interesting question that's probably going to continue throughout his career is, is it going to make more sense for him at some point to shoot with his right hand outside the paint on jumpers?
Yeah, and another thing that he's worked on a little bit is the free throw shot. I mean, has that for you gotten better? Do you think it's still something that needs to get better? I mean, that he needs to work on more, or have you seen that develop over the course of this season?
Definitely, I would say something he still needs to work on at this point. You want to get comfortably above 60%, particularly as someone who's going to have the ball in his hands at the end of games, as we saw a few weeks ago when, he got. I'm still not sure whether it was intentionally fouled or not, but it worked at the end of that tie game.
Kevin Pelton's with us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Let's go to number 3 on the list, and that is Joel Embiid. 31 games last year. Guy missed 2 seasons. He just played officially his 82nd game the other night. So 1 full NBA season. I don't know what your expectations were for him entering this league. I mean, it was hard to believe that he missed 2 full years and did what he did last year, but his sophomore season has not disappointed.
Absolutely not. I mean, continuing to make strides in terms of, you see the benefit of that experience. What I thought was really incredible about that is, not just that he'd missed the previous 2 seasons, but that he had so little high-level basketball experience. 1 year of varsity basketball in high school rather, a half season in college because he dealt with injuries there. And, it really was almost entirely about both his incredible physical tools and then just the individual work he'd put in while he was off the court to develop, his post-up game, add a three-point shot, everything like that. But you can't simulate the experience of playing 5-on-5 basketball, defenses, your teammates out there, and that's where I think the improvement has come in terms of better passing, cutting down on his turnovers, which are still kind of high, and, making the right read on defense.
Kevin, on Embiid, the league's a three-point shooting league. My question would be then, can the Sixers build around 2 guys who aren't really three-point shooters, although Brett Brown seems to think that Embiid could be a better three-point shooter and expect to be a title contender in the near future?
Yeah, I think so, because again, it's about, the shooting ability is most valuable when you're playing off the ball. So if Simmons and Embiid are the 2 guys involved in the play in the pick and roll, it's not as important for them to necessarily be able to shoot threes. And I do think Embiid will, emerge as an above average 3-point shooter eventually. But it's more about you need quality shooting from the 3 guys around them, and that's where Dario Saric's improvement from 3-point range this season has been so important. Robert Covington, having the ability to make the 3, and then as you project forward, whoever the other member of that lineup is going to be, making sure that player is a knockdown shooter.
Kevin Pelton with us. A lot of people say they should just keep Embiid in the paint, but, Mike Gill points out a lot on this show that Embiid is special because he can go out beyond the arc and knock down that 3.
Exactly, and sometimes that's going to open up space for the drive for Ben Simmons. I mean, even as effective as he is down low, you're still going to want to have that versatility to be effective both inside and out.
All right, Kevin, the other Sixer that made this list before we take a look at some other players, because it's a really cool list of the top 25 players under the age of 25. And the last guy, number 25, Dario Saric. And, early in the year, he looked kind of like a square peg in a round hole with this team. They were kind of converting him into kind of a stretch 4. Since Christmas, he's been on 43% from beyond the arc. He was only 34% before that. So he seems like he's settling into this role as kind of a stretch 4 that gives you so much more.
He's done a terrific job this season. And, I think it was a question to me of, was he going to be able to play with the starters for all those reasons you outlined about needing more shooting in that starting lineup, or was he going to have to kind of emerge as, kind of the leader of the second unit where he could play more with the ball in his hands like he did last season? But, the development he's made as a 3-point shooter, and we'll see if he can keep shooting quite this well, has allowed him to play off the ball. And then he's been, effective in a variety of defensive matchups and gives the Sixers more defensive versatility at that end to go along with Covington and Simmons, who can match up with a variety of different players. So, all of that I think very encouraging in his second season.
Yeah, and maybe that he's not on that level that you think of right off the bat as a big 3, but he's certainly putting himself in position where you have to remember him when you're talking about the Sixers.
Yeah, and I think that informs what they go out and do this summer in free agency with the cap space that they have. The fact that Saric has shown that he can be a starter, and the fact that Simmons has shown he can defend point guards, gives them a lot more flexibility what they can do with that money.
Yeah, and we look at, by the way, you talk about cap space, there's been a lot of buzz about LeBron James and Philadelphia. And there's billboards all over the place. We had Mark Jackson on earlier, who Mark Jackson with a C, not Mark Jackson with a K, who thinks that LeBron would be a bad fit for Philly because he would stunt Ben Simmons. Do you think that Simmons and LeBron could coexist?
It would become a challenge for all those reasons in terms of the shooting. Now you've got, LeBron has shot the ball, I think, better than almost ever from 3-point range this season. But now you've got 3 guys who, primarily are not shooters, who all of whom you want to play with the ball in their hands. So, it would be a concern from that standpoint. At the same time, I'm not sure I would turn down LeBron because of it. I mean, that falls under the category. That would fall into the category of good problems to have.
By the way, on Kevin's list, the list that we went off was of Bobby Marks, Kevin Pelton, and Chris Herring. They each did their individual list. You had Joel Embiid at number 5, Ben Simmons at number 6, and I do not believe that Dario made your top 25, correct?
That is correct, yeah, because, again, I'm a little skeptical that he's going to be quite this good as a three-point shooter consistently.
Okay, and by the way,
Didn't
Dario...
make Chris Herring's either, by the way.
No, but he was 18th on Bobby Marks' list. But one guy who did make Chris Herring's list but did not make the other list was Markelle Fultz. Now, I know, Kevin, you are very familiar with Fultz. You're up there in the Pacific Northwest. You saw him play at Washington a lot. We talked about him way back in about November, December. And are you surprised that he is still not playing?
Yes and no. I mean, we sort of had no idea at that point how it was going to play out, but I think certainly would have felt that this was going to be one of the possibilities that, it was going to take long enough. And the recent signs in terms of the shooting we've seen from him in practices has been encouraging. But now you run into the point where I think Brett Brown talked about this the other night. You start to wonder, do you want to have to integrate him in the middle of a playoff push by this team that, has a chance to make some noise in the playoffs? And that presents a different set of challenges than just, his own game.
So do you think him sitting out, Kevin, is still injury-related, or do you think it's more confidence issues?
I mean, I think it's related to them, believing that he can be successful on the court and part of a team that helps them compete for the playoffs. So, I think it's pretty well documented, the situation medically, and we've seen what his jumper has looked like and now looks like. So, it's starting to look more like something where you can feel comfortable putting him out on the court again if you feel like you can reintegrate him in the stretch run.
How about his skill set? Is he exactly what the Sixers lack? Because Mike and I have talked about Ben Simmons' reluctance sometimes to be the slasher, the guy that goes to the hole, because I guess Simmons doesn't want to get fouled or he's apprehensive of his free throw shooting. But Markelle Fultz, you think, would be able to be a guy like that?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what he played at Washington, and we'll see how confident he is in his own free throw shooting, which was sort of the root cause of, or at least the first sign that something was amiss going back to training camp. But he's got, with his ability to run the pick and roll, the ability to get to the basket and put pressure on a defense like that.
Now, if they had a Fultz type of player, do you think they'd be a legitimate threat this season in the East? I mean, they are just 2 games back of the number 3 seed.
I mean, I think if we're talking about a fully realized version of Markelle Fultz, then the answer is probably yes. But as much as Simmons and maybe Donovan Mitchell and Jason Tatum have, changed our thinking this year, the fact is that most rookies don't do that much to help you win. So I think even if you look at a healthy version of this year's Fultz, I don't know if it makes that much of a difference in terms of bottom line wins and losses. I mean, I'd compare him. I think his college production was similar to Dennis Smith, who went a little lower in the draft because doesn't have the same kind of size and isn't the same kind of shooter. But he's in the different situation where he's been given the keys from day one and just allowed to go play. And he's been very up and down as a rookie. I think that's kind of what you would have expected from Markelle Fultz.
Now, taking a look at this list with Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com, NBA Insider, the top 25 players under the age of 25. One guy that's pretty high on your list that does not appear on Bobby's list, but he is 23rd on Chris's list, and that's Lonzo Ball. You have him at number 9. Is this something that you've seen all season, or has he been coming around recently that you like him that high?
A little of both. I mean, this goes back to last year. I had him as my top prospect in the draft. And, even when he was struggling with his three-point shot early in the season, he was still contributing in a lot of other ways. He's got a chance. He's right on the borderline, but a chance to join, as I mentioned in this article, Simmons and then Oscar Robertson and Magic Johnson are the only other players in NBA history to average 7 rebounds and 7 assists per game as rookies. So even when you account for the fact that pace is faster now, it's easier to do it. It's still a very impressive company for him to be in. And defensively, I think he's proven better than advertised. He's really good at reading plays before they happen, something that makes him such a special offensive player as a passer, but then also helps him at the defensive end as well. So now that the shooting is starting to come around a little bit, he's up to almost 34% from three-point range. I think that's just kind of allowing the other skills that Lonzo brings to the table to shine.
It's interesting looking at these lists that, how different some of the lists are. But one interesting spot is both guys have Joel Embiid at number 3. You have at number 5, and you have him behind Jokic. And what do you like about him better than Embiid?
Well, first off, I'm just really high on Jokic. He's, maybe the most skilled center we've seen in the league since like the Sabonis days in terms of his playmaking ability from the high post. He's got the 5th highest assist average ever for a 7-footer so far this season, and then also his ability to shoot the 3 and play in the post. When he's engaged, as he was last night, and in that close loss they had to Cleveland, he's as good as an offensive force as we have anywhere, and I think his defense is a little bit underrated. But the other factor there, I think if you're telling me that Joel Embiid is going to be completely healthy, clean bill of health the rest of his career, I'd put him ahead of Jokic. But I just don't know that we can make that guarantee at this point, given the issues he's had in the past.
Interesting. A couple other guys on the list. Devin Booker, you have down at 13, and Booker, obviously plays on a pretty bad team, but he's a guy that I really like. I thought he was interestingly placed at number 13 on your list. Also, Jason Tatum, a lot of people were buzzing about him earlier in the year. You have him at number 16, and Tatum is a guy that a lot of Sixers fans were kind of saying, well, Fultz hasn't played. We wish we ended up with him. What about those two guys there, Booker and Tatum?
So Tatum, a lot of his early success was based on, shooting 45% plus from three-point range, and he's regressed to the mean somewhat there. I mean, that wasn't really his game at Duke, or even early on in his prep career. He was really known more as a mid-range kind of guy, and I think Brad Stevens has done a nice job of improving his shot selection to focus more on threes than those mid-range jumpers, but that wasn't quite sustainable, and now he's settling in more into a range that's consistent with what he's going to do going forward. As for Booker, I think he's made dramatic strides this season. Before this year, his statistical production wasn't there in terms of the advanced stats to match the hype around him, particularly after that 70-point game he had in Boston. He wasn't a particularly efficient scorer last season. He's improved a lot there. He's gotten, making the strides that he needs to. Defensively, I still think that's probably never going to be a strength of his game, even though he's got the tools to be a good defender. It's just not his focus.
It's an interesting list. Check it out at ESPN.com. Kevin Pelton, Bobby Marks, Chris Herron, who has been on the show plenty of times. He's been in our area a lot, Chris, so we've had a lot of good chances to catch up with him and talk some basketball. And Kevin's, all three of them really smart basketball guys. They all have different views of these players, all top 25 under the age of 25. But it says one good thing, Kevin, is that the league is filled with a lot of really good young players right now.
Absolutely. I mean, we've done this list ever since I started at ESPN, and I think this is probably as deep as it has ever been with Anthony Davis, just barely now under the age of 24. He turns 25, I think, next week. And then, he's in the MVP conversation right now, so is Giannis Antetokounmpo. These young big men in the league, Embiid, Towns, Jokic, all terrific. And then this is one of the better classes of rookies we've seen in recent memory, led by Simmons, but also Tatum and Donovan Mitchell. So it's a good place for the league and a good place for the Sixers.
Well, now while we're on that topic real quick, I want to get your take on the one and done that's been up for discussion a lot, that the NBA is trying to, figure out what to do in lieu of all the problems with college basketball. We got all these young, talented players, but do you think the one and done is working?
It's interesting. I think in terms of player development, it's worked okay, but the issue is really just kind of forcing players. I think Simmons is a great example of where it doesn't work, where, this is someone who, if you watch the Showtime documentary about him, seemed to be miserable his entire year at LSU. And it's like, wait, you're about to be the number one pick. This is not supposed to be like this. I think he would have been much happier, and he would have developed more if he were playing at the NBA level, because he wasn't really challenging himself a lot of the time against college opposition. So, I think it's still a limited number of guys who are ready to help in the NBA right out of high school, but forcing those players to spend a year in college, especially with the rules being what they are, the corruption being what it is at the NCAA level, I don't think that's helping either the NCAA or the NBA.
Wouldn't that potentially – I see what you're saying about Simmons. Wouldn't that potentially be changed, though, if the players had to stay? There'd be better competition?
So if they had to say multiple years?
Yeah, like like I read the other night I was watching SportsCenter. Devin Booker goes for 39, and I forget who the anchor was, but they're like, this guy should be a senior at Kentucky, and you're thinking to yourself, man, that's crazy to think. But like if those players were there for 2 and 3 years, the competition would be better. So a guy like Ben Simmons would be challenged more when he went.
It would be better. I think the issue in terms of NBA development, though, is, part of what's happened over the last 2 decades is that the NBA and NCAA games have grown increasingly different. The NBA is just, to borrow Joe Lacob's phrase, light years ahead in terms of the skill, the spacing, the quality of the offense. The college game, it's just not going to showcase a player like Ben Simmons' skills, even if you've got multiple guys like that.
Good stuff, Kevin Pelton. Check out the list at ESPN.com, and you can, of course, check that out at ESPN.com, and follow Kevin Pelton on Twitter at KPelton, and, of course, listen to him here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Playoffs are down the road here. We'll be talking soon, pal.
All right, sounds